Hey Tannah, how you doing?
Hey, Holly. Good. How are you?
I'm good. Good. Had kind of a busy weekend, but excited to launch into talking about the Enneagram Fours today. Before we go all in on fours and fourness and all the things we love about fours, just really quick, this podcast is called Enneagram Adventure, and Tannah and I are both IEQ9 certified coaches with that Enneagram tool. So for personal development or relationship work, things like that, certified to use that tool. And when we talk about fives next week, we'll talk about maybe why we chose that tool, but it's a very five reason, at least why I aligned with that particular Enneagram tool. Tannah, is there anything else you want to kick off with before we jump into all things four?
No, just a quick recap. We've been going through each number, kicked our podcast off with a very brief summary of all 9 Enneagram types, and we are currently on fours. So we're going to make
Yeah.
our way through all of the 9 types and then dive a little bit deeper into the Enneagram stress lines, growth lines, subtypes, tri-types. There's so many other things that we can talk about. So
Yeah.
we're making our way through 4 today and onward to 5s with our resident
Yeah.
5.
Yeah. Next week, all about fives. Yeah. And then all of our listeners will know too much about me. It'll be a whole thing. You did make me think of something though. I've gotten a few questions from a few people who are listening just to clarify wings because we often sort of touch on wings in our conversations, but just to provide a little bit of clarity, because we're going to talk about four as a wing of mine today. And I can give some examples of how the fourness shows up as that wing. But just to clarify, wings are the numbers that are directly adjacent to your core number on the Enneagram sort of symbol, or, it's the 9-pointed star. If you were to look at that symbol, it's the two numbers directly adjacent to yours. So for me, as a 5, my wings are 4 and 6. So I just wanted to clarify that just because we've gotten a couple of questions about that. We appreciate
Yeah.
the questions. Keep them coming. Okay. So fours.
Yeah. 4s. Gosh, how do we start off on 4s? There is so much to dive into with 4s. They are deep individual
They are.
is the best way that I can describe it. I don't have a lot of 4s in my life. I don't know about you, Holly.
There are a few, I think in my personal circle, I suspect a few folks, but again, not confirmed. Haven't had an Enneagram discussion with them. My work life, there's a few fours, both past and present. Maybe one of these days when we get to interviewing numbers, we'll convince one of them to come on here and talk about their fourness. But fours are often called the individualist, or sometimes the creative or the romantic. And the motivation for fours really is this idea of being unique, special, unlike everyone else. And it comes from this, just as we've talked about, these things are picked up in childhood as strategies to survive in whatever your family situation was. So for fours, that could have looked like, a parent that really emphasized uniqueness in some sort of way, or it could have been in response to a rebellious sort of response in a family, right? If everybody was sort of into the same thing, let's say it's sports. Totally making this up, but let's just say it's sports, and one child is like the artistic one. There's a chance that in a situation like that, that artistic child is the 4, the one that sort of wants that very unique sort of experience in the world and sees themselves as unique and different from the people around them. What am I missing there on that motivation?
I don't think you're missing anything beyond most times with 4s, some of that uniqueness is manifested in some really deep feelings like really intense feelings that
Yeah.
fours feel. So it can actually be perceived like, I get that you're upset about that thing or you're really happy about that thing, but the feeling is much deeper for me.
Right. Yeah. Yes. They are really driven by emotions. It's very internal for them, but they really ride the feelings that they get throughout a day.
Yep.
A couple other notes just about fours in general. Depending on how much Enneagram content you consume, you might have heard that of all 9 numbers, there are the least fours in the world of any other number. I don't know that I 100% agree with that, but in my experience, in terms of meeting people and talking about the Enneagram, it has been true so far within the groups that I've talked to about the Enneagram. Don't know if it's true across the board. So I just thought I would share that, which is also very fitting for a number that feels like they're unique and sort of different than the rest of the world.
Right. I think that they actively seek that too, where
Yes.
it's the consistent seeking of the really intense emotion, like the highest high or the lowest low, right?
Yeah.
To your point about them riding waves throughout the day, all the fours that I know in my life are really balanced between the positive waves and the negative waves. Like they don't really get caught
Yeah.
in the negative waves. And that is something that I think is really important if you are a four to identify and notice about yourself, right? Because you have this ability to feel really high highs if you're a four. So if you find
Mhm.
yourself as a four trapped in some of that really low spot emotions, try and seek something that's going to pull you out of it because
Yeah.
ultimately you're able to feel that higher high too.
I think fours are really comfortable in the dark feelings. And this isn't to
Hmm.
pass any judgment on anyone's feelings, but they're really comfortable in the feelings that maybe other numbers or kind of society in general deems as darker or twisty. They're comfortable holding that space for people as well. They can be amazing friends if you are in sort of a darker spot, maybe, or sad, grieving something, or having one of those like down moments. Fours are really amazing because they have this ability to hold space for those feelings of depression or grief or sadness without feeling the need to fix it. So they can just sit with someone in those feelings. And that's one of my favorite things about fours is that they don't have the need to try to toxic positivity their way out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good call. Me as a two, I'll jump in and be like, how am I going to fix this feeling right now?
Yeah. Right.
But a four, like, let's sit in this discomfort, which is 3/4 of the battle
Yeah.
from a hard work perspective. If you're trying to do deep work on yourself to be more well-rounded and move through anything that you've been dealing with or have held on to for your life, I think it's that deep work that fours may actually excel in from
Yeah.
that side of it, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Uh, where most people are like, ooh, that's
Right.
it's really cringy. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to sit in it. I don't want to. Then it's the moving through it.
Right. Yeah.
So get there, sit there for a moment, and then feel it to be able to move through it
Right.
without pushing it aside.
Without pushing it aside. I have, from a few fours that I've known, just a few behavioral things about them. And then I'll speak to a little bit how it shows up for me from a wing perspective. But just the behavioral things. Like I know a four who makes all of her own clothes so that she never is matching someone else. Right. So her outfits are always
That's cool.
100% unique. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's very four kind of behavior. Fours also have this, and we touched on it, right? Is like the rebellious sort of thing a little bit, but it's
Mhm.
the rejection of anything popular. There could be a book or a movie or a TV show, a band, something like that, that becomes really popular, and recently, actually, I was teaching the Enneagram to a group, and we were talking about four, and we were talking about this sort of rejection of popular things, and they're like, oh, so is that why I don't like Taylor Swift? Right. So it's like that. Yeah. Right. So there can be that sort of rejection of the thing that everybody else loves just for the sake of rejecting it. It might not be that they actually totally dislike it, but they don't, everybody else likes it, so therefore it is not unique and authentic to them.
My niece has been trying on Enneagram 4 for quite some time. She has always been wildly sensitive, like very, very sensitive. She also has this thing of like, I remember in school, in kindergarten, she had one of those sequin shirts that like you brush up one way and you brush down and something. And there was a friend in school that was copying her all the time to the point where like she would come home and just be like beside herself. She's like, I don't like it. She's copying me. I don't like it. And it's funny, right? Because she is an only child and all of her cousins that she's close with, so my kids, are all boys. So she is unique. Like, she is an only child and she's the girl in the family. But it's really funny sometimes to look at kids who are trying on numbers, or you might perceive as trying on a number, right? Because it's almost like they give you the example of what it might be, but in the most simplistic form, but the most dramatic all at the same time.
Yes. This is not a personal story of mine, but while we're talking about kids a little bit, when I was first learning the Enneagram, this was an example that they used in a class that I was taking. And the teacher was talking about her family. She raised, I think, 4 children, and one of the boys is a 4. And she was talking about, as a child, how he rode that wave of emotion. And the example that she gave is that they live in Texas. The example she gave is that he got off the bus from school, and as probably, I don't know, like 10, 11-year-old. And she's like, change out of your school clothes. We're going to go get dinner at Whataburger. And he's all excited and so happy, and he runs off to go change his clothes. And, 10 minutes later, he comes back and he's really sad, like almost in tears. And she says, what's wrong? We're going to go get dinner. You were so excited about it. And he says, well, when I went to change my clothes, I started thinking about it. And I started realizing that burgers are made from cows and cows are living things. And I don't want to eat living things. I think I want to be a vegetarian.
Oh my gosh.
It's just that how they kind of ride, like they get kind of on a thought and they just ride the emotion associated with it all the way until like maybe they've come like 180 degrees to a different spot.
Right. Yeah. Oh, my Tunis feels like an extreme amount of empathy for 4s. I think whenever I find myself around a 4, because you can feel, because they feel emotions so, so big, I can feel what they're feeling. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine if that was my all day, every day.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's a gift, right? Because
yeah,
as we, now classrooms are starting to evolve where they talk about social emotional learning all the time, right? And this is another story about my niece trying on a 4, but my sister told me this weekend that she's starting to say things to my sister like, you're not on my team. You need to show me some empathy.
And how old is she?
She's 7.
She's 7.
Oh, she just turned 8. Yeah. Yeah, she's 7.
Oh, that's funny. I do think it's great, though, that they're starting to teach that stuff at school. I mean, what a difference that will make.
Totally. I mean, to be able to name the emotion that you're having, right?
Yeah.
Is in and of itself, for a kindergartner, that's something I'll do with my son. When it's hard to distinguish, are you sad or are you angry?
Right.
Because that's 2 very different playing fields I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah.
I'm sad and mad.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I do think those things are tied for sure. Right. Okay.
Yeah, so
So
that's the other thing that fours, I mean, I think in a four in a really healthy space is able to identify their emotion differently than most other numbers and much
yeah.
faster, maybe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even when there's a combination, and there's a lot of strength in that, where if you are confused about what you're feeling, or, we just talked about threes last week where they're likely emotionally avoidant, and you get to a point where you've shoved that aside for so long and then you're confused.
Yeah.
My sister gave me some Enneagram content this weekend. She told me even yesterday, she's a 9, but she'll get to a point where she's shoved so many emotions down that then it's manifesting itself. And her husband will be like, "What's wrong?" And she's like, "I don't know. I'll let you know when I
Yeah.
know." I
Yeah.
don't know.
Once I don't know. Yeah, I'm excited to get to nines. We're a little ways out from that, but you and I both have some nines in our life. But
Yeah.
fours don't. Fours can recognize it. They can recognize envy.
Right.
They can recognize their span of emotions from happy to sad, and they're comfortable across that spectrum. They can be like super beautiful thought leaders too. I don't, in terms of a public figure who's talks about being a four, Glennon Doyle is a four, and she talks about that pretty openly and
Mhm.
how that shows up for her. And as you learn the Enneagram and you learn fours, you can kind of see it in the way that she goes about herself in the world, also in her writing. She's just a beautiful, beautiful writer. So, I know on their podcast, she has a podcast called We Can Do Hard Things, and they occasionally talk about the Enneagram over there too. So, another place to head for content if you're looking.
I think that's a good call too. You bring up creativity. Would you say that the fours that are generally speaking more creative than others in the truest form, like artistic wise? Creativity can mean something different for everybody. It could be clothes for one person. To your earlier point, it
Right.
could be
Yeah.
art. It could be
I think they have a desire for it. I don't know that they're more creative, but they're driven by the creativity differently than some of the other numbers. And it could be creative writing, it could be, to that point, like creative fashion
Mhm.
or music, or it could literally be art. There was a tattoo artist, and again, I don't have this confirmed with her, but just spending time with, you can't see this because you're listening and it's a podcast, and you also can't see it because I'm wearing long sleeves if you're watching on YouTube, but I have a whole bunch of tattoos. And the artist that did the majority of them, I would suspect was a four. She was very quiet, but really in tune to sort of this creative emotion and this desire to express the dark side of that.
Mhm.
Right. So in some ways, yes, but they're so driven for that artistic expression or creative expression in whatever way it comes through.
Interesting. The other thing I think that could be a strength of a four is maybe creativity for them just looks like creatively solving a problem. They're thinking about maybe the idea or the thing that nobody's ever tried to solve that one problem.
Right.
Just from hey, I'm going to contribute something unique.
Yes. Some fours have a tendency to reject the Enneagram too a little bit. I think every number has its span of that where they're like, don't put me in a box.
Sure.
And we talked about this in other episodes, but sometimes I've heard fours say things like they had to sort of concede that they are in fact a four, but they just feel so misunderstood in the world
Never.
based on their uniqueness that even if they are a four, there's no way anybody could really understand them. So they can be, and I would say we've talked about ranges of health with numbers in a couple of the episodes. And when fours are unhealthy, they sort of double down in that space of no one understands me. My perspective is so unique and so different from the world's. It's not possible for anyone to understand that.
I think in that vein, it can sometimes be hard to help a four move through discomfort if they are looking for help to move through it. At least that I've found in my life for the couple of fours that I do, that I do know when they are sitting in a spot, it can be hard for them to actually completely let something go without taking other data points and drawing it back to that same conclusion that they've got, right?
Right.
But the flip of that is, I think most of the fours in my life have all said to me at one point, your feelings are valid.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. No, they have that nailed. Yes.
Your feelings are valid.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think that fours kind of are the easiest for me to try to embody through a song or a person that pops in my head that can show up really angsty, like
Yeah.
punky, you know,
Yeah.
which is something I find endearing about them, actually, because they are all the fours that I know are really creative. You can really tell that they try to stand out a bit more than the average individual. If that's them owning their natural hair, if that's them like wearing something totally different than somebody
Yeah.
next to them, if it's
Yeah.
something super bright and funky, they typically stand out amongst the crowd in more ways than one, is what I've found.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I think for me, having the four wing for a long time, I would have told you that six was, as a wing, was very dominant for me. But in the last probably 5 years, so, and in terms of really learning the Enneagram, I've started to wrap my head more around the four and like lean into that space, I would say. Even if look at this podcast, for example, or the content associated with that, I have this desire to be a creator, right? And to approach the world from a space of, I want to create more than I consume. That's a very four kind of behavior. I also definitely have the rejection of popular things. And the example I always give is I have never read nor watched the Hunger Game books or movies.
That's crazy.
And that was like a hugely popular cultural moment. And I was just like, nope, everybody loves it. Not interested. So I think there's that aspect of fours that come through for me. And then in terms of tri-type, I'm a 5 who feels like a 4. We'll get into that. But so that's very internal. Like I hold all of the feelings internal. I like to think I can read a room okay, but I kind of keep it to myself. I don't necessarily express it outwardly.
Why do you think that shifted for you 5 years ago? Was there something that happened? Was there something that sticks out that made you shift from a wing perspective?
Well, for me, as I've gotten older, the 6 wing behaviors, not to make this all about wings, but the 6 wing behaviors got exhausting. I couldn't hold them anymore. I couldn't hold that space. And it's been gradual, but also I think in every episode we've talked about Brandon at Evolved Athlete. But also as I've gone through the work with Brandon over the last year and a half or so, the 4 stuff has come through stronger. And I think it's through that work of doing that deep work of processing those emotions, understanding where they come from, where they're held in the body, has also allowed more of that creative side to come through. Whereas I think some of the shift has been the rejection of people pleasing, the desire to do what it is that I want to do and that brings me joy, as opposed to worrying about other people. So I think that's some of that shift. I still have some 6 things, particularly around money, but the 4 just really comes through a lot stronger. And there's moments I can reflect back and see some 4-ness when I was a kid. But 4 space wasn't super safe for me, so I didn't lean into it very often.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because as a 2, my growth line is 4.
4. Mm-hmm.
So when I'm at my best, I take on the healthy traits of a 4. And if you consume any other Enneagram content, you'll hear Suzanne Stubiel talks about the soul child theory. And similar to that, I would say I believe that I was maybe supposed to be a 4, and then life happened, and you get through your family system by other behaviors. And so that also tracks for me, where in my 2-ness, right, I kind of chameleon into where I'm needed to be helpful.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of room for extra big emotions or uniqueness as a
Right.
result, how I needed to move through, right? So if you're ever interested, like do some looking for those listening around soul child theory, and that might make more sense to you once you figure out what your number is. I've actually had some people who didn't agree with their number,
Mhm.
right? And then ultimately, if you look into the soul child theory, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. I get it.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's not that that doesn't exist in you somewhere or it wasn't part of you at some point. It's just your motivation changed somewhere along the way.
Yeah. It became an issue. We'll definitely have to do an episode on soul child theory too, because I do believe in that theory in the Enneagram. I know there's like talking about sort of mixed philosophies within the Enneagram. Just gonna rabbit hole for a hot second. There are some people that believe you're born your
Mhm.
number and you're
Yep.
predetermined and it's destined for you. And then there are others that believe in this sort of soul child theory that Tannah's talking about, which is if you look across the lines of the Enneagram, which we'll deep dive into at some point, that you kind of were on the path to be one number and then something happened to you as a kid and you sort of pivoted to another number. And typically, the soul child theory would tell you that it's based on something traumatic in your childhood that happened, where it was like, oh, this path I'm headed down actually is not safe. And so I need to do something different. And so you head into a different direction.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point because the word safe too, that can mean for your ego, that can mean literally, that can mean your emotion, that can mean a whole wide
Yeah.
range of what would have made you feel uncomfortable in that moment, that was unacceptable or
Right.
not
Yeah.
going to be how you are able to get through your household.
When we talk about safety in terms of these unconscious choices that we made as children, because nobody consciously makes this choice. This is all
Right.
very unconscious or
Right.
subconscious behavior that happens. And the one thing I will say, and say it often, Tana's heard me say this before, is like safety always wins. It always wins in terms of your nervous system. So if your nervous system perceives a threat, it will always go for whatever feels safest. And so, yeah, it's just, it might not be to the point that Tana's making. It might not be like a physical threat that that your nervous system is picking up on. It could be something else, emotional or psychological or something like that. Even if it could be something really small for a kid too. It might not be truly traumatic situation. It could be
Mhm.
something small where and then the child's like, oh, I need to protect myself from that happening again. And so they pivot.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it could be something as simple as, I'm rewarded for this particular behavior. So
Yeah.
I'm moving towards it. Or I've been, you know, held accountable for this behavior. So I don't want that to ever happen again. Right.
Right.
It could be any number of those things.
Yeah. I heard a
I think,
story once, just I don't know if you would agree with this, but like every child perceives based on their emotions what could be considered trauma in different ways. But I heard this story once from someone who talked about as a small kid that they had like a favorite blanket, like a
Mhm.
Linus. Speaking of who might be fours, maybe Linus on Charlie Brown, probably a 4. But like a kid had a favorite blanket and it was disgusting, right? It needed to be washed. And the mom was just like, I'm going to take Blanky and I'm going to clean it up for you. And she takes it and puts it in the washer. And the kid has like a complete meltdown that this thing that's so special to them had been taken.
Yep.
Even situations like that can cause those subconscious shifts in a kid. There was like no ill intent there whatsoever. She's thinking that thing is disgusting and I just want to clean it for you and you're going to get it back in a half an hour. And like
Yeah.
the kid perceives that as the end of the world emotionally.
Yeah. That tracks as a mom.
Yeah.
Truthfully, like any parents who are listening that have toddlers will appreciate this. That's why, like, in my personal opinion and with my kids in particular, trying to sneak around any one of those things never works.
Yeah.
I can't grab that security blanket and throw it in the washer really quick thinking, because they won't use it
Yeah.
in that 45 minutes to an hour that it takes for that whole process to be done. But that was also why I noticed that whenever my husband and I would have plans and we would get a babysitter, when I would leave, it was like a whole thing.
Yeah.
Like a whole thing. And there for a while, I was actually sneaking out first. I would run to the car quick while Landon was finishing up with one of the grandparents. Because I'm like, I can't do it. It was selfish for me. So like, I don't want to hear it. Like, I felt so bad. So then I actually had to start just prepping them for it 2 days in advance. Hey, in 2 sleeps, mom and dad are going to do X, Y, or Z. Hey, in 1 sleep. Hey, today. And then gradually get shorter and shorter, right? Yesterday, I took grandma to brunch with my cousin and my sister. And 20 minutes before I was leaving, I was like, hey guys, I'm going to go do this thing. They're like, okay. But the sneaking around about it never works. In my house. It always backfires. Down to like, am I going to cut the toaster strudel in strips or am I going to cut it in pieces? It's a question. I need to ask the question or it will be World War III.
Yes.
I wanted strips. Of course you did. Good point about there being the least number of fours. In my earlier point about social emotional learning that's happening in school now, that didn't happen when I was a kid or when you were a kid. I wonder if there's going to be more fours in the world.
I mean, I hope so.
I hope so.
I hope so. But I even just think across the world, like all of that's just going to be, it'll be so curious as your kids, like as their generation grows up and to see how that impacts the world. Your kids are going to be generation alpha, right?
Is that what it is?
Or are they beta? I don't know. I don't know. We're way rabbit holing on this related to fours, but I think about it in generational terms a little bit. And I do think maybe we go on a podcast on this about how the Enneagrams show up across generations too. But just to get back to fours, every once in a while when I teach the Enneagram, we'll talk about sort of geography of numbers and how different areas can also have sort of a type to them. And Austin, Texas is the city that is most often brought up as a 4 city, right? And sort of that, so it's that they used to have that saying, I don't know if they still do, but it was like the Austin motto was like, keep Austin weird. And sort of just it's like a music town, but then it's also really foodie and it's artsy and it's sort of a blue city in a big red state. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting. I mean, I could take a shot in the dark at Wisconsin, but Midwest nice.
Yeah.
Hey, gonna squeak past you here. Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry. Oh, yeah. No, sorry.
Yes. We can make some assumptions.
But going back to that social emotional learning, well, I talk about it with my kids. I think it is something that our generation, being the millennial generation, is kind of teaching themselves at this stage in the game, where they're finding the value in identifying and experiencing and understanding that there's things that they can unpack through that work that comes very natural to them. So
yeah, for sure.
There's a lot of gifts that fours have that I love. Another character that's a 4, one of my favorite movies is Mean Girls. Janice Ian, I feel, is a 4.
Okay. Yeah. I was trying to think of another 4 off the top of my head that's like a character that's a classic 4. Oh, Moira Rose.
Oh,
if you were a fan of Schitt's Creek, Moira Rose is there's a lot of 4-ness there, right? From the sort of constantly changing style to the voice, to the, just her unique perspective on the world. Hopefully
Yeah.
that doesn't like offend any fours. I mean that in the best possible way. Every number has like such a unique perspective in terms of their motivation and everything. And fours, the ones that I know, I just really appreciate them for that perspective, and sort of they look at the world a little differently, and it's not unrealistic. I don't think they're unrealistic people, but just sort of the lens that they look through is unique. And sometimes when I talk with them about something, it can cause me to pause and think about things. And there's one four that was on maternity leave. I'm not sure if it was her first, I think it was her second child. And she wrote a book. She wrote a book while she was on maternity leave.
That's crazy.
And I remember talking with her about that, and sort of this thing that she was going to do to kind of release that into the world, and all the stuff that she was going to do, and just being also so impressed with that level of creativity and that desire to create in that way.
Right. Right. So for those that have fours in their life, what is the way that they can support fours the best and kind of make them feel seen, heard, valued?
Yeah, I think one thing, and when I teach the Enneagram Fours tend to agree with this statement, don't tell them to look on the bright side. If they are in a moment where it's dark for them and they are in some emotions, and as we all should, need to sit and process that through. And they have no desire to move through it any faster than they're going to do on their own. And they do not want to look on the bright side. So don't offer that advice when you're with a four who's in the mud or whatever. Like let them be there. So the best thing is to reciprocate for them what they would do for you, and hold that space and allow them to process through those emotions. And I think that's just the biggest across the board, is just allowing them to go through that. And if they want to talk to you about it, let them talk to you about it without trying to solve. And then if they are quirky, that we're all quirky, every single human being. There's nobody who's like perfect. Everybody has quirks. But if you are coming across a four that's in a quirky or a fun space too, like let that happen. Don't squash that creativity.
Yeah, that's a good thought. That's a good thought. When I've had to give fours feedback before, the thing that I've found to be most successful is to ask questions before I get there, so I can really be sure that I understand where they're coming from, but also want them to feel understood, that I care enough to ask questions to try to understand before saying, well, this is how this is coming off, or this is the feedback that I have related to that. Because I think it does mean a lot to the fours that I have in my life that you care enough to try to understand their uniqueness or their depths, even when they know you'll never be in the same space, or if they think you'll never
be in the same space.
You'll never be in space then.
Yeah. You did make me think of too, through that, in terms of sitting with them. There's a couple things in terms of fours we didn't touch on. One was orientation to time. Fours orientation to time is the past.
Yep.
And so they're going to be sort of reliving moments, both in their mind, but also emotionally, as they reflect on things. So to your point of giving them feedback and asking the questions, it's sort of allowing them to be like, oh, and reflect on that in that moment as you're going through that with them, because of that orientation to time and just sort of the way their brain works. Fours are also a withdrawing number. And we will get to interaction styles as its own podcast where we'll talk about every number. But particularly if they're emotionally or mentally overwhelmed, fours will withdraw. It could be physically. It could be in their own mind. Like it might go from they're participating fully in a conversation to picking up their phone and scrolling because they whatever it is has become emotionally or mentally overwhelming for them in that moment. And that's like a place to sort of cover that up or hide from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it could look like they've had enough and they can physically remove themselves from a space.
Yeah, that's true too. That's true.
Yeah.
Fours can, because of their orientation to time being the past, I've also found that fours can sometimes be like romanticizing
Oh,
about the
yeah. That's a
past.
good call.
It could look like for them wondering if they had done something different or kind of creating this like really dramatic movie-esque thing, a situation that happened to them. And that's why I do love to hear some fours tell some of those stories about their past, because it
Yeah.
almost plays out like a movie, but it's through this lens of romanticizing the moment or romanticizing about what if they would have done something differently? What could their life look like now? Right.
Yeah.
That's something that's interesting about fours too.
Yeah. I have some of that wing. I have some of that four wing behavior a little bit.
Do you?
Yeah. Yeah. It's usually around anybody who's listening to this podcast who knows me personally knows that in a past life, I coached kids on horses, gave riding lessons, trained horses, hauled kids all over, particularly the Midwest. But we went, well, all over the center of the country because we went down to Texas a few times and Oklahoma, places like that. But I sometimes will have these like romanticized moments about a horse that I sold too soon. And what if I'd kept them? And maybe I'd still be showing horses today if I'd kept that one or whatever. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, when we dive into fives next week, we'll talk about their orientation to time, which is also the past. So those things are linked. Yeah.
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, my growth line is 4. This is my lowest number on the Enneagram.
Yeah. We're at some point we'll have to like deep dive on the like lines. Yeah. Yes.
Also known as I have a lot of work to do on my growth line.
Yeah. We're going to keep Brandon in business with that.
That's for sure.
All right. So
yeah.
What do we want to close on for fours? Do we have anything? I feel like there's more to say on every number.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think probably one of the best things that once we get through sort of our all 9 types and we start bringing some guests to the pod, that will bring also a whole new perspective on each number from that first person place. So I'm excited to do that for every number, but fours for sure, just to really hear from one of them how it shows up for them in their life. Yeah.
Yeah, great mention for sure. There's always more to say about every number. I think in closing, what I would say is there's a lot of really beautiful things about fours, and they are unique and special, like every number, but they have a lot of things to offer others that they find intrinsically within themselves that is really great about fours. So I would like to leave on a positive note related to that, but with also a teaser for next week, fives. Are you ready to unpack your 5 minutes?
Oh man, we're going to unpack the fiveness. There's a lot there, guys, a lot there. Like I said, every listener is going to be like, oh, I know too much about you after that.
It'll be great. It'll be great. It'll be awesome. For those who are just joining us, follow us on Instagram, Enneagram Adventure, TikTok, send us a note, drop a comment with how the podcast resonates with you or somebody that you know in your life. Would love to interact with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, we love getting the questions. However they come in, love it. You can find us on YouTube, also Enneagram Adventure, and then on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And in my fiveness, I also learned how to upload the video version of this to Spotify this week. So you can also watch us there if you are not watching on YouTube or you're not a YouTube platform person. So
love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
But definitely any interaction, and we'll drop in the show notes all the social places you can find us, the email if you want to reach out with questions, all that sort of stuff.
Awesome.
If you love this, we would love for you to also leave a review, subscribe on whatever platform. All that stuff really helps us.
All right.
Thanks,
Holly.
Yeah.
Until next week.
Talk to you next week.
My tribe friend.
Yes, all about fives. I'm going to be prepping for the next week.
All right.
See you later.
See ya.